Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Carine Hajjar, filling in for Shirley Leung. Today we talk about Harvard, higher education, and free speech. I graduated from Harvard in 2021, and at that time Harvard had a serious censorship problem. It was the height of the pandemic, right after Black Lives Matter protests, and in the middle of a surge in DEI programs. And I just remember that my classmates were always scared to say what they actually thought in class. Fast forward to 2024 and the Gaza protests on campus, and there was no possibility of open, vigorous debate. And some students were even scared for their safety simply because they had unpopular views on campus. Enter Donald Trump.
In recent weeks, Americans have been horrified to see students and faculty at Harvard and other once-respected universities expressing support for the savages and jihadists who attacked Israel. We spend more money on higher education than any other country, and yet they're turning our students into communists and terrorists and sympathizers of many, many different dimensions. We can't let this happen. It's time to offer something dramatically different.
The administration told Harvard to change its admissions, its hiring practices, and its academic programs or lose billions of dollars in federal funding. Harvard and the Trump administration are battling it out in court. My guest today is Harvard professor Steven Pinker. He's been critical of DEI and wokeness at Harvard for years. But now Steve is defending Harvard against Trump's attacks. He also has a new book out this month, What Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Before we jump in, I want to ask you about Charlie Kirk, who was murdered while speaking at Utah Valley University. It's really shaken campuses across the country. What kind of conversations are you having at Harvard?
I noted that in a macabre coincidence, the killing happened the same day that the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression released its annual Academic Freedom Report. Among the chilling findings of the report were that a third of Harvard students think that at least sometimes it's okay to use violence to stop a dangerous speaker. Now, on the same day that Charlie Kirk got shot, you can't say, oh, that could never happen.
In an op-ed in the New York Times, the president of Barnard College, Laura Ann Rosenberry, argued that now's the time to host controversial speakers on campus. Do you think colleges are going to follow her advice?
Now, I don't think that colleges should go out of the way to find the most abrasive, inflammatory, incendiary speakers they could find to probe the boundaries or just to rile people up, see what they could get away with. I think that colleges should invite speakers who have something to say. Some of them ought to be controversial because there's a lot we don't know about a lot of topics and there's more than one opinion. But I don't think they should poke the bear or whack the beehive for its own sake.
So you've been back on campus for a few weeks now, and it sure was a busy summer for the university. Trump tried to suspend the entry of foreign students. He has threatened Harvard's tax-exempt status. A federal judge ruled the funding cuts are unconstitutional, but the administration is vowing to appeal. And at the same time, Trump demanded $500 million to settle the whole mess. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but amid all of this, does Harvard feel different than it did in past years? What's all the buzz on campus about the federal pressure that we've seen happen?
What you didn't mention is that virtually all of Harvard's federal funding was zeroed out. So research in the medical school, the public health school, research on basic biological processes, on cancer, on neurodegenerative diseases, on antibiotic resistance, on childhood cancer metastasis, on energy, on wound care, methane detection, on and on and on. I mean, the Trump administration has canceled it as a punitive measure against Harvard. It's really an existential threat to what Harvard is, namely a first-class research university. We're not just a liberal arts college that teaches students about Shakespeare.
I want to ask a follow-up to that. I think a lot of people wonder, these threats have been made and the Trump administration has halted some of this funding. But are you seeing the actual effects of this on campus? Are you seeing vital research sort of ground to a halt, long trials having to be frozen? What does it look like on the ground?
Oh, absolutely. Now, the university, it's a wealthy university. It's the world's richest. It's got an endowment of more than $50 billion. But the thing about an endowment is that's money that you don't spend. It's designated as the principal for which the university draws interest or investment income. And 80% of it is earmarked for specific purposes. They have provided an emergency fund to try to tide over major research projects, especially those where an interruption could result in years of research being lost. But it is a dire situation, particularly since it is not in response to particular infractions that could easily be corrected or that Harvard could desist from. It's not as if Harvard broke this law, the penalty is such and such, and Harvard has to pay the penalty and stop doing what led to the fine. This is just sheer punishment. The Trump administration is racking their brains for all the ways in which they could cause pain to Harvard.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the punishment started as Harvard was already sort of making some key changes. Institutional neutrality comes to mind, ditching diversity statements for certain faculty hiring. What other changes have you seen Harvard make on its own accord, and are these actually making a difference on campus?
They are. There's a classroom compact that students understand that they can say anything they want in class, that you don't snitch on your fellow students for what they said in class.
Wow.
There's
I wish I had that.
yeah, a number of the centers and programs, some of which had been causing a lot of the trouble because Harvard has 400 of them. These are separate from the departments. And some of them kind of went rogue. They became like 24/7 anti-Israel propaganda machines. But now our dean has had all the centers in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences report to her on their intellectual diversity. So it's not just to become monocultures or propaganda machines.
Do you think it's enough? Have we fixed the underlying discourse problem on campus?
No, we haven't fixed it. We're absolutely heading in that direction. There have been a lot of changes, many of them made before Trump took office and some after. To be honest, it is quite possible that the threats from Trump hastened some of these changes, gave some urgency toward them.
So what do you think of this battle with the Trump administration is going to be? Where does Harvard have to hold the line? I mean, what are the worst and best case scenarios that you foresee from this struggle?
Well, the letter that the Trump administration sent Harvard on April 10th is, someone put it, an offer that Harvard couldn't not refuse. They were absurd demands, such as not to accept any student that did not accept the founding principles of the United States and the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. That is a clear violation of the First Amendment because it pertains to belief. That Harvard units would be audited for intellectual diversity by a panel approved by the government. And if they failed to have enough diversity by the standards of the government would have the right to install a critical mass of faculty to restore viewpoint diversity in by their definition, and a number of other requirements that were absurd on the face of it. So the worst case is they try to impose those. That would be really, really terrible. Obviously, in negotiations on such a sensitive issue with billions of dollars in the future of the university at stake, they're not going to blab their bargaining positions to us. So we don't really know what's on the table. I think it's not unlikely that they would try to strike a deal because no one knows what the Supreme Court will decide. But also, on top of the Supreme Court risk, there is the determination of the Trump administration to impose, and I'm quoting from one of their advisors, a ladder of pain to try to think of every means that the federal government has at its disposal to cripple Harvard, and some of which may be legal simply because the law books don't prevent it from happening, and it just never occurred to anyone in the government before to apply them. There were norms. The Trump administration is very happy to shatter norms of how government exerts power.
So some of your fellow faculty members are against just the idea of negotiation with the administration because they see it as capitulating to authoritarianism. I know that you've been in favor of a negotiated end to this period of pain. Tell me a little bit about why and respond to your fellow faculty members who frame this as a capitulation.
There's a sense in which it would be a capitulation and that what the Trump administration is doing is really indefensible. But, they are the government. They say that if you're held up at gunpoint, don't be a hero, don't resist, hand over your wallet. That's the situation that Harvard is in. Now, I don't think that Harvard should sacrifice genuine academic freedom. That is, the government having any say on the composition of the faculty, the composition of the student body. That should be a red line. If it's forking over some kind of protection money, extortion money, the university might have to hold its nose and do it.
What do you think about universities like Brown, Penn, Columbia that have given in to the Trump administration's demands? Is this a positive thing? Is it troublesome? And what example does it set for the rest of academia?
I think it was a mistake to concede without fighting back, simply because what the Trump administration is doing is patently illegal. It violated the Administrative Procedure Act, which says that the government can't withhold benefits for arbitrary reasons. It has to have a rationale, stipulate what the rationale is. It violates the First Amendment because a number of these conditions depended on viewpoints and opinions. So I think Harvard was right to sue, and I think the other universities should have sued too.
So do you think that Harvard is as anti-Semitic as the Trump administration contends? This is sort of their defense for doing all of this and attacking Harvard in the way that it has. Where does the issue of anti-Semitism stand right now on campus?
I think there are problems. I think the university doesn't treat anti-Semitism with the same gravity that it treats anti-Black racism. I think that it tolerated some infractions, such as a teaching assistant dismissing a discussion section so they could attend an anti-Israel protest. There have been incidents like that. But the idea that Harvard is a bastion of Jew hatred, that is out of touch with reality. And I say this as a Jewish professor who's been at Harvard for a good part of the last 50 years. 3 out of our last 4 university presidents who've served longer than a year have been Jewish, and the 4th was married to a Jewish professor. 3 out of our last 3 provosts were Jewish. 40% of the top university professors, the top of the hierarchy, are Jewish. This is just not an anti-Semitic institution. It really is not. And it's clearly a pretext, particularly since this is an administration that has tolerated some horrific anti-Semites, such as inviting a Holocaust denier to a presidential dinner at Mar-a-Lago.
You share some frustrations with conservatives and even the Trump administration about higher education. Where do you overlap, and where are the main spots where you disagree?
With Donald J. Trump?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. So I agree. Again, you have to ask what day of the week. But I think viewpoint diversity is a problem. I think that if only 3% of the faculty is conservative, there's a problem there that students get punished or inhibited from expressing opinions. I think that the Harvard should take anti-Semitism seriously, which it has in a massive report. Soul-searching, self-critical report. But Harvard is a private institution. Even if it has problems, the government is not empowered to diagnose and fix those problems. Look, there may be problems in my marriage. That doesn't mean I want Donald Trump to station federal agents in my house to fix them.
Oh, dear.
Because
send the National Guard in.
Yeah, not every feature of the country is the business of the federal government. That's what a democracy is. The government is empowered by the Constitution and by laws to regulate certain things, but it can't just decide that something that it doesn't like somewhere in the country can be rectified by federal intervention. And that includes, by the way, even though Harvard does get government grants, there's a widespread misconception that taxpayers support Harvard, so taxpayers should have a say. Now, these grants are not just kind of alms or charity. They don't just go into the general budget. A professor writes a grant proposal. They're competitively evaluated for research that the government decides is in the national interest. If it is rated highly enough, funds are allocated to do that research. It's a fee for service. And written into the law is that the government can't arbitrarily deny citizens or organizations benefits that have been granted by Congress for arbitrary reasons. So if Donald Trump doesn't like something that I said in an op-ed or something that I did, he can't dock my Social Security payments. And he can't say, well, you're getting money from the government. You have to do what the taxpayers say. A democracy doesn't allow a government to control the spigot of funds that citizens are legitimately entitled to according to Congress, according to his whims, to reward or punish the people he likes or dislikes.
You've been talking about the lack of free speech at Harvard for years, and you've been pretty public about those criticisms. Some conservatives use your points as an excuse to go after Harvard's independence. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And some of my faculty colleagues say we shouldn't criticize Harvard in public because all those criticisms will just be used as weapons by the Trump administration against us. And I think you can't operate that way. Any institution has to be on the lookout for things that need to be reformed. We're not perfect. We'll get worse if we don't recognize our problems. In fact, you could make the argument the other way that one of the points that I repeatedly hear, even from people who are not out and out MAGA people, is, look, universities are impervious to change. Professors get tenure. They have no incentive to change. They blow off criticism. They cancel people who disagree with them. Nothing short of a gun to the head is going to get a university to change. They're not going to change from within. And I think our response has to be, we are changing from within, so put the gun down. We can't make that argument if we have a kind of omerta, a vow of silence. Don't criticize the university.
We'll be back with my guest, Steven Pinker, after the break. I want to turn to your book. It's called When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows, about how common knowledge shapes the world. What is common knowledge, and why is it important?
Common knowledge in this sense, it's a little different from the way people use it in conversation to refer to just conventional wisdom. In the academic literature, and I'm kind of stuck with the term because that's just the way it's used, it means the situation in which I know something, you know something, I know that you know it, you know that I know it, I know that you know that I know it, and so on ad infinitum. What makes it important is that it's necessary for coordination, for two people being on the same page, each doing something that works if the other guy doesn't and knows that you're doing it. I mean, a very simple example is driving on the right or driving on the left. There's no advantage to driving on one side or the other, but there's a huge advantage to everyone driving on the same side, whichever it is. The words of a language. A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet, but we can use the word rose to convey the idea of a rose simply because if you're an English speaker, you just know that that's what English speakers use. So there are lots of examples like that. Something as simple as a rendezvous, ending up at the same place. I can't just guess where you're going to go because you might then guess where I'm going to go, and you might guess where I'm going to guess you're going to go. We got to have the common knowledge, which we arrange with a cell phone call. Language generates common knowledge, but that special state of not just knowing something, but knowing that others know it is what allows people to coordinate on scales from currency and language to our everyday social relationships. What makes two people friends? Well, it's not as if they sign a contract. You're friends if you know the other person knows you're friends, and because they know that you know that they know that they're friends. And so a lot of I suggest the rituals, the euphemisms, the dainty minuets of everyday social life are to either generate common knowledge or keep things out of common knowledge.
And there's been a lot of writing on this topic, but why did you choose to focus on common knowledge now? Why is it the topic of your book coming out in 2025?
It's not really a topical book in the sense that it's a response to Donald Trump. It's an area that I've been doing research on for 15 years. It's an area that I think a lot of academics who are specialists would say this is a really important idea. It explains a lot of mysteries, of regime change, of economic bubbles and busts and bank runs, of why nations go to war. But it's a real shame that people out there haven't been told about this concept. It explains so much. And the books that I write often fill that niche. Like there's a really powerful, cool idea buried in academia. It's not so hard that intelligent, literate people can't understand it, and I try to make it accessible to people.
You do have one chapter in the book about cancel culture. How is that connected to common knowledge?
Yeah, so that is it's not the only topical chapter, but it is certainly topical. The question I raise there is, why do people feel the urge to shut people up based on the content of their ideas? Why do we have social media shaming mobs, deplatforming? I mean, what's so terrible about expressing an opinion? So norms, what decent people do or don't do, are held in place by common knowledge. That is, I don't do it and I expect you not to do it because you expect me not to do it because everyone expects everyone not to do it. So if a norm seems to be flouted in public and therefore it's common knowledge that you can get away with flouting a norm, there arises the urge to punish the violator also in public, to prop up the norm, to keep the norm a norm. And social media provides cheap opportunities to pile on someone, and people feel the urge to uphold the moral order by punishing a violator in public. So I cite an apocryphal story, but it makes the point. In 19th century Victorian England, when a fancy high society lady heard about Darwin's theory, she said, "Descended from apes. My dear, let us hope it is not true, and if it is true, let us hope that it not become widely known." Now, the fact checkers found that this woman didn't exist. This is the aghast woman. But nonetheless, it captures a sentiment. Let us hope that it not become widely known, that even if people know it, they don't know that other people know it. And so it doesn't kind of pollute our set of moral norms. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but that's my analysis of cancel culture.
No, it's a very fascinating book, and we were so grateful to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us on Say More, Steve.
Thanks so much for having me.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. Our producer is Sarah Birnbaum, and our engineer is Uzair Ahmed. Jim Dow is our editor. You can reach us at saymore@globe.com. If you like the show, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Carine Hajjar. Thanks for listening.